Lesson 1. Washington and Congress. Creating a new government. The Philadelphia Convention had given the nation a new constitution. George Washington's task and the task facing the newly elected Congress was to take the words of the Constitution and turn them into an effective government for the United States. To get the government up and running, the president needed a bureaucracy to handle different responsibilities. In 1789, Congress created the Department of State, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of War, and the Office of the Attorney General. To manage these departments, Washington wanted individuals who were disposed to measure matters by a continental scale, instead of thinking only of their own states. He chose Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury, General Henry Knox as Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. Washington regularly met with these men to ask for their advice. The department heads came to be known as the Cabinet, a group of advisors to the President. Congress also established the federal judiciary. The Judiciary Act of 1789 created 13 district courts and 3 courts of appeal, in addition to the Supreme Court established by the Constitution. With the Senate's consent, Washington appointed the federal judges and selected John Jay to become the first Chief of Justice. Financing the government. The most pressing need for the new government was a source of revenue or income to pay for the nation's expenses and massive war debts. Without funds, the government could not operate. James Madison, one of the leaders in Congress, and Hamilton responded to this need with different plans for financing the government. The Tariff of 1789. Madison's plan was to tax imports. After much discussion, Congress passed the Tariff Act of 1789, which set tax rates on certain imported items. Congress also passed the Tonnage Act, levying a tax per ton of cargo on ships entering the United States, with foreign ships taxed at a higher rate. Hamilton's planned program. Hamilton supported these measures, but he believed the government also needed the ability to borrow money. To fund the Revolutionary War, the Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, had issued bonds. Bonds are paper notes promising to repay money with interest after a certain length of time. By 1789, the United States owned roughly 40 million to American citizens and another 11.7 million to foreign lenders. Few believed the bonds would be repaid in full, and many had been sold at a fraction of their face value. Hamilton asked Congress to redeem the bonds at full value. Hamilton believed that if the United States accepted these debts at full value, then wealthy creditors, bankers, and merchants who owned the bonds would have enough confidence in the federal government's financial stability to let it money in the future. Hamilton had described the importance of debt several years earlier. A national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. It will be a powerful cement of our union. It will also create a necessity for keeping up taxation, which, without being oppressive, will be a spur to industry. Opposition to Hamilton's plan. Led by Madison, critics argued that Hamilton's plan was unfair to the original purchasers, who, fearing they would never be repaid, had sold their bonds at a low price. They were outraged that speculators, most from the North, who had bought the bonds at those low prices, would now benefit. Hamilton's plans was to assume the state's debts also worried Madison and other Southerners in Congress. The Southern states, with the exception of South Carolina, had nearly paid off their war debts. The debate raged for months. In July 1790, Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson reached a compromise. Southerners voted for Hamilton's plan, and in return, the nation's capital would, in 10 years' time, relocate to an area on the Potomac River that would be called the District of Columbia. Southerners believed that having the capital in the South would keep the federal government responsive to the region's interests. The Bank of the United States. With his system in public credit finally in place, Hamilton asked Congress to create a national bank to manage the nation's debts and issue bank notes, paper money. The notes would serve as a national currency and promote trade, encourage investment, and promote economic growth. Southerners opposed the plan. Madison argued that Congress could not establish a bank because it was not among the federal government's enumerated powers, or powers specifically listed in the Constitution. Hamilton disagreed, noting the Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gave the federal government the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper to execute its responsibilities. The necessary and proper clause created implied powers, powers not listed in the Constitution, but necessary for the government to do its job. In 1791, Congress created the Bank of the United States within a 20-year charter. The Whiskey Rebellion. Hamilton also believed the government had the right to impose taxes. In 1791, Congress imposed an excise tax on the manufacture of whiskey. The new tax enraged Western farmers who distilled their grain into whiskey before sending it to the market. The Whiskey Rebellion erupted in 1794 in western Pennsylvania. Farmers terrorized tax collectors, stopped court proceedings, and robbed the mail. Later that year, Washington led about 13,000 troops to crush the rebellion. The rebels dispersed without a fight. The rise of political parties. During Washington's first term in office, the debate over Hamilton's financial program divided Congress into factions based on their views of the federal government's role. These factions became the nation's first political parties. Hamilton's supporters called themselves Federalists. His opponents, led by Madison and Jefferson, took the name Democratic Republicans, although most people at the time referred to them as Republicans. The Democratic Republicans later became known as the Democrats. The party known today as the Republican Party is a different party that was founded in 1854. The Federalist Party does not exist today. Hamilton and the Federalists. Hamilton favored a strong national government. He believed that democracy was dangerous to liberty. The people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right, he had written in 1787. This distrust led him to favor putting government into the hands of the rich, well-born, and able. Hamilton favored policies that supported manufacturing and trade since he believed they were the basis of national wealth and power. Jefferson and the Republicans. Although James Madison led the opposition to Hamilton's program in Congress, Thomas Jefferson emerged as the leader of the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson believed that the strength of the United States was its independent farmers. His ideas are sometimes referred to as agrarianism. Jefferson argued that owning land enabled people to be independent. As long as the people owned land, they would fight to preserve the republic. Jefferson feared that too much emphasis on commerce would lead to a society sharply divided between the rich, who owned everything, and the poor, who worked for wages. Jefferson also believed that the wealthy would corrupt the government and threaten the rights and liberties of ordinary people. Dependence begets subservience and venality, openness to bribery. suffocates the germ of virtue. While we have land to labor, let us never wish to see our citizen occupied at a workbench or toiling at the staff. Let our workshops remain in Europe. It is better to carry provisions and materials to workmen there than bring them to the provisions and materials, and with them their manners and principles. Thomas Jefferson from the Notes of the State of Virginia. In general, Democratic Republicans supported agriculture over commerce and trade. Over time, they became the party that stood for the rights of states against the power of the federal government. The development of America's first two political parties divided the country regionally. The rural South and West tended to support the Republicans, while the more urban Northeast tended to support the Federalists. Although these parties emerged during the dispute over Hamilton's programs, events in Europe would deepen the divisions between them and create new crises for the young nation.